How many games is enough? Well, unless you're somebody who says it's never enough. It's got to be enough at some point, right? One of the most simple ways to determine this is to just look at how many games you have already and how many of those games you've actually beaten. If you've already beaten all the games you have, then it makes it pretty easy to add some new games, doesn't it? But that's not always what retro gamers do, is it? No, they got backlogs that are out the wazoo. And those things are so out of control that it gets to the point where when it comes to buying an additional game to add to your collection, you think, well, you know what? My backlog is already a complete circus, so what's the harm in adding a few more games to it? Let's do it. I think what it comes down to is that we are creatures of habit when it comes to hunting down games, conditioned almost as an instinct, and you can't turn that off. So anytime we have free time, we're going to be looking online for games, or if we're out in public and there's a place that sells games, you can bet your butt that we're going to look and see what those games are, and if there's something we're interested in and the price is right, yeah, it's going to be pretty hard to say no, isn't it? And I think that's a big part of it. If you find a game for a price that seems like a deal, you're going to feel like you're missing out if you don't get it. And because we're always constantly looking for games, you're going to inevitably run into some situations where the games are priced as a deal. Point I'm trying to make is if you're looking for games, then you're buying games, and it's pretty hard to stop looking. For the sake of fun, let's talk about collecting goals. Now, when you complete a collecting goal, and even say the loftiest of collecting goals, what happens once you reach that goal? That's right, you just come up with a new goal. It never ends. Quick little story for you. So over this past year, I've really gotten into collecting Game Boy stuff. We're talking the original Game Boy through the Game Boy Advance. Now, the first thing I started with was the original Game Boy, and I'm having a grand old time collecting for that sucker. Thing is, the games are actually pretty cheap for the Game Boy. Highly underrated system, I really recommend it. Anyways, I'm collecting for the Game Boy, and I have a set list of which games I want to get. Now, I complete that list and get all those games, and then that was enough, right? Wrong. No, then I wanted to get Game Boy Advance stuff. Point is, it's almost like collecting one thing just whets your appetite to collect another thing. And then within your collection, it's almost like you have these gateway collections where they just get you into other stuff, like, oh man, that Sega Genesis collection. Once I got into the Sega Genesis collecting, that was it for me. Then I wanted Sega Saturn, then I wanted Sega Dreamcast, then I wanted Sega CD. Pretty soon it's like I need everything Sega, all because you started collecting for that one Sega console that you really like. Something else that I would like to bring up is how many games we have for each specific system. Now, typically you'll just buy more games for the consoles that you like more and less games for the consoles that you like less. However, where I see gamers sometimes getting themselves into trouble is that with those systems that they don't like as much, they'll feel obligated to have a certain number of games, and so they'll maybe kind of force it a little bit. Like, you have this one console and you're like, well, I can't just have 2 games for it, can I? Well, check this out, folks. 2 games for the Nintendo DS. That's all I got. And that doesn't mean that I hate the DS. I'm actually quite happy to have those 2 games that I do have for it. Although I can see how it would appear if you don't have very many games for a console, that means you don't like it very much. And I know a lot of times people will say like, you know, I really like this console and I have, you know, a bajillion games for it. And that's kind of a way to show how much they like that console. Actually, that's kind of a fun little activity you can all do. Look at all your different collections you have for all your various systems and rank them by how many games you have for each console and see if that lines up with how you would rank the consoles from your favorite console to least favorite console. That's really interesting. I wonder if that would line up for a lot of you, or at the very least be pretty close. Okay, now diving into things deeper, I want to look at specific types of games, because I think this is a huge determining factor in how many you're going to get. For example, something like RPGs, they can be very long games, so you might be prone to not buying as many of them. Now, if RPGs are your jam and that's the only type of game you really play, then that's a different story, but in general, most people have to think about how many they can realistically make it through. I only have maybe about 10 or so. But then let's take a different type of game. Let's say shoot 'em ups. Now, shoot 'em ups, you could have a whole ton of these because you can easily just pick one up, play it for 10 or 15 minutes, have a blast, and then go on to the next one. So it's very easy to have a ton of shoot 'em ups and just play through those suckers without worrying too much about how long they're going to take to play. Now, of course, shoot 'em ups definitely can require a lot of time if you start thinking about the challenge some of these games present, and especially if you want to do something like a 1-credit clear, things like that. But in general, shoot 'em ups are a pretty safe bet for having a lot and feeling like you can make time for all of them to play them. The next thing that I want to talk about is games that you have stored away and that you've possibly even forgotten about. And this could also include consoles, memorabilia, knickknacks, you name it. Now, the thing with these is that maybe one day you will remember it and be like, oh yeah, I'm so glad I hung on to this. And then you bring it out and it's great. But a lot of times that stuff just sits there forever until you realize, you know what? I haven't cared about this for years and it ain't gonna happen anytime soon. Point is, if you don't like a lot of the stuff that you already have, that may be a sign that you don't need more things. Or at the very least, you should maybe get rid of some of that stuff before you start adding new things in, because then you can feel more guilt-free about adding that new stuff in. Also, something else that can happen, and this can be kind of sad, is that maybe you have some games or consoles, what have you, that you really care about and it's important to you, but you just simply don't have any space anywhere to put it to display it properly, or at least how you would ideally want to. I think a good rule of thumb to go by is that you gotta have the stuff that you already own properly organized and managed before you go adding new stuff, or at least that will probably make things a lot smoother for you. Anyways, that about does it for my thoughts. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is how much are your collecting goals stressing you out. If certain goals are causing you to feel stress and any sort of negative feelings, then that's when it's time to reevaluate those goals, because who needs to be feeling any of that nonsense? Okay, so for this video's question, I thought we'd do something fun. In addition, of course, to any regular comments you may want to leave. I always love reading those. But what I thought we could do is something that a couple of you actually started on the last community post that I did, where you say, how many games is enough? And then you list some example. You can read right here what some of those people put and just have fun with it. I think that would be a lot of fun to read what all of you come up with. So be sure to leave those comments down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's the retro